If you're like me, you could definitely use some extra cash right now. So if you're sitting on old engagement jewelry that's been collecting dust in a drawer that you're like, why do I even still have this? I've got news for you. The experts at Worthy can help you turn that into cash. The cash you could probably use right now on your single parenting journey. It's risk-free, it's fast, literally no more than 2 weeks until you are joining one of the 80,000 people who have already had their jewelry turned into cash. Thousands of people have left verified 5-star reviews. This is a legit process that will make you feel so much lighter and your pockets a lot fuller. Trust me, these guys are the real deal. So all you need to do is visit worthy.com/moms, and I'm going to give you an extra $100 on me if your jewelry sells for over $1,500. That's worthy.com/moms, and I've got you covered. The top financial divorce question I hear most: am I going to survive financially? Divorce brings so many unknowns. Your home, the kids' school, travel, clubs, even health insurance. How will it all be covered? You deserve to know the answers and see exactly what your finances allow. That's why I've teamed up with Certified Divorce Financial Analyst Sylvia Guinan for a new segment of our Moving On Method podcast called Money and Moving On. Together, we are going to help you confidently plan your future and maintain the lifestyle you've worked so hard to build. As the next step, click the link in show notes to get your free guide, Navigating Divorce, and consider it a first step to clarity and confidence with your finances. The use of the CDFA designation does not permit Wells Fargo advisors or its financial advisors to provide legal advice, nor is it meant to imply that the firm or its associates are acting as experts in the field. Wells Fargo Advisors is a trade name used by Wells Fargo Clearing Services, member SIPC, a registered broker-dealer, and non-bank affiliate of Wells Fargo and Company. I may be good at divorce and co-parenting, but numbers are a whole different story. And it's amazing how many questions I get in my inbox from clients, in my DMs, around how am I supposed to handle my finances? How am I even supposed to handle getting divorced? Can I even get divorced? I don't have money, or at least I don't think I do. These are the questions I've been dying to answer for you for so long, but you know how I am. If I can't speak to it, I won't. That's why I have Sylvia Guinan with us, now part of our Money and Moving On series, where we are going to break it all down for you and make it so easy to understand, specifically because I need the help understanding it, that you will feel so much more empowered financially on your journey to divorce. Sylvia is a certified divorce financial analyst and a badass babe. Sylvia, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Michelle, for inviting me. It's just such a pleasure.
I'm really excited for this segment because it's probably way overdue for me to broach this topic about money and all the intricacies that come with getting divorced. Majority of people who reach out to me haven't worked in years. There are so many questions I can't answer, and I knew right away that you'd be the perfect person.
Well, no, thank you. And I think you're right. I think it's the one thing that keeps us all up at night.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the one thing we feel uncomfortable with. And it's the one thing my team and I really love to work with people on.
Yeah, I think it gives people another sense of empowerment. The two things people worry about most are kids and money, right? And once you have that figured out, the whole divorce process definitely starts to feel somewhat more tolerable.
Yeah. And I think what your work is so important, right? Because we come across, clients that we work with and we support during the financial part of it. But, there's all the emotional part and the moving on part that I think people like you are doing just beautiful work. So thank you for doing what you do.
And I think it takes a whole village, and that's why teams are so necessary when preparing to divorce. I know so many people will say to me, like, I don't have a lot of money. I don't need to speak to a financial professional. I'm like, well, the amount of money you have does not mean you don't need the knowledge, right? And so it's great that we're bringing this awareness to people that in the intake, it takes a village sense. It's a professional village too.
It really is. It really is. And I think I love the idea too, right, is that, we can all learn as we go, right? But I always say, even to my kids, why would you want to hit your head against the wall if you don't have to? If you have beautiful, amazing, strong women that have been through it and are willing to onboard and help and educate, I think it's just such a great way to fast forward through one of the most difficult processes you will go through, because divorce is tough.
Yeah. And first things first, I want to acknowledge the fear. If you're listening to this right now and you're still in your head about like, too scared to do it, can't even try it, there is no other way, we have to validate that for you, because there's nothing scarier than having to survive on your own after, I guess, for lack of a better word, depending on somebody else. Do you see this come up for a lot of women, this fear?
I do, and I agree with you. I think that that is the hardest part is, and I call it finding your truth. I wrote a book on divorce, and it's mostly the emotional things that we go through. But I call it finding your truth because it is. Because I think that we have like two different sides, right, of us. We have our mind, which is very ego based, saying, "Really, you're going to do this to your family? You're that unhappy? Is it really that bad? You're not going to make it." Whatever the scary voice is telling you. But then you have your heart saying, "Oh my God, I'm not happy. Like I cannot live like this. I can't raise my kids like this. I know that it doesn't look right." And I think it's again having to quiet the top voice, right? The ego voice so that you can listen to your heart and move forward.
Yeah, and very often I think a lot of the fear is instilled by the other ego who is saying to you, good luck leaving me, you'll never make it on your own, or if you leave me, I'll leave you with nothing. I'll take you for everything you have, or something of that nature. And if you've been in a relationship where emotional abuse or control have been present, it's easy to take that at face value when you don't know what your options are. I always tell my clients, just because they said they're not going to give you anything doesn't necessarily mean that's how it will pan out. There are laws, there are rules, there are processes and things that need to be followed, but they just need to understand that more, because me saying it, it's helpful, but seeing it in front of them with what you've been providing for people and now are providing for our listeners, it's invaluable. So the issue of financial abuse in marriage, it's unfortunate because more people will talk about domestic abuse and take that into account before anything else. And I feel financial abuse is this hidden, sneaky little thing that until you point it out to somebody, they don't realize that's what's happening. How do you see it show up in marriages?
Yeah, I see the same thing. And I think usually what we see, right, is the dynamic, it starts off very strong and, everybody gets into their roles. And then, usually there's, the spouse that doesn't ask about the finances and everything's being taken care of, right? So, maybe you just don't even want to, right? You're just going about doing your part of, right,
Hmm.
the marriage. And then I think it gets to the point where you start to feel unhappy or uncertain. And then it's almost uncomfortable to ask, right? Because the person's going to want to know, well, why do you want to know? And what we see, and it's really sad, and I get it, right? But there's a lot of when women are thinking about going through divorce, sometimes there's a lot of embarrassment and shame because they feel bad about not having been involved, right?
Hmm.
But the reality, there is no shame. We have to honor ourselves. We do the best we could do during the time that we could do it. But if we're going to go through a transition, that's the time that you invest in yourself and you create a team. You work with people like you work with financial people,
Hmm.
and you go through it.
Yeah. It's such a shame because there is this like glorification of the boss babe and the mom who does it all, works a 9 to 5, then picks up the kids, makes dinner, does all the things. It's a very hard life to live, and many people do not live like that. I'm a little bit old school in the sense that like I think the hardest and best job in the world is the one in the home, especially if you're already co-parenting. That's a whole nother ball game. But I think it starts with that acknowledging or not shaming yourself for not having played that role. I think traditionally speaking, if you are in a marriage where the man or one spouse provided everything and took that off your plate, it's naturally going to feel difficult to come around and ask questions. But in the case of financial abuse, where let's say a woman is told what to spend and how to spend it and cannot ask for more, or is chastised for spending regularly, this is going to probably put even more pause in her mind about moving forward with the divorce. How are some ways you see attempts at financial abuse once the process is started? Because I hear all these horror stories about like, I asked him to move out and he cleaned out the bank accounts, or he froze our accounts and now I have no access to money.
Yeah, I think that those are the times that you really have to lean on your counsel. And you had mentioned something at the beginning of our conversation, right? Like, what do you do when they're telling you, there's nothing there or you're not going to get anything? And I think the best thing to do is to not get involved. Don't play the game. You disempower them by saying, okay, well, you know what? We can either work it out together or let's let the attorneys figure out if there's something there.
That not playing the game is
Right?
pervasive. Follow that advice for the rest of your life in any case, but especially in divorce. I think when there's been a imbalance of power financially, and I say that respectfully to the fact that one person was in control and one person wasn't, it's going to seem easier for that person to control you moving forward. But I have seen, not that I'm telling everyone to go get divorced for financial reasons, but there is eventually a leveling of the playing field. Is there not?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Depending on the length of the marriage and what's occurred, I mean, if there's assets, nobody's going to be left without anything, right? Like it's going to be figured out and it's going to be split, hopefully amicably. In my perspective, I think so many people get caught up on, am I going to get into anything? I mean, the courts can pivot a little bit, but there's not a whole lot that can be done. So I think if you're not happy, right? Don't worry about the money. And I get it, right? Because, we all have, and we talked about this the other day, we all have tons of ruling emotions, right? Like lots of emotions, but our two really ruling emotions are love and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we're going through a divorce, right? Sad, that love that you had or you thought you had is gone. And then fear is at an all-time high level, right? Because the finances. You don't know financially, how you're going to fare through this. And you don't know what the lifestyle is going to be. And as for moms, that makes it even harder because we want to protect our babies and we want to make sure we can have our time with our children and also be able to care for them financially.
Yeah. I always reference the Children's Bill of Rights in all my conversations. And this is not a legal document, but a psychologist many years ago based in Atlanta, Robert Emery, he put together what should be like almost the constitution for kids who are going through divorce. And one of the rules in there is children have the right to a financial situation that is as close to what it would have been had the parents stayed married. And I always beg people to think about, a lot of times I do work with the client who is in control of the money or has more money, that hurting your ex by preventing them from spending or maintaining a lifestyle is a direct hit to the child. And most people don't realize it. And that's where that term, you have to love your children more than you hate your ex, come into play. But then I've also seen amazing ex-spouses who recognize that the child should still have the life they're accustomed to and will choose to assume all expenses because they have the earning power and the financial power. But it's interesting. I polled my community on, scale of 1 to 10, how scared are you or were you about your financial situation going through divorce? And it was across the board a 10. But then I got this DM from a woman and it like burned into my soul. And she said, this question couldn't have come at a better time. This is the first night in my own 1-bedroom apartment with my child. We have a mattress on the floor and I've never been happier. I've never felt freer. And I'm just so excited to start over. And so I think it goes to show that if your marriage is really one you need to escape, it's worth doing it, even if things might change for a little bit.
Yeah. I kind of say something similar, but we say to our clients too, because it's true. There's no price for your freedom, right?
There isn't. Yeah. And of course, there are prices for everything else, right? Like, how am I going to pay for school? What do I need to consider moving down the line? When you work with people who have children that are 2, 3, and 4 years old, they're not thinking about braces and summer camp and college funds and retirement funds because they may still be very new in their careers. So what are some misconceptions or things that women overlook when they are starting the divorce process?
I think the most important thing is picking out your team, right? I think, who you decide to go through this journey with, your attorneys, your mediators, is really going to set the tone.
Divorce coach.
Right, your divorce coach,
Yeah.
especially. I mean, because you're not only there, you're there during, and you're there after, right? And it really, your role is enormous, and your role doesn't go away. So it's key. And I think that, again, it's all about having a fit, right? Some people want an attorney that's going to be a little bit more cold and to the point. Somebody else may want to have somebody that's going to do a little more hand holding and explaining. And you kind of need to know. And I think that as a client looking for a divorce attorney or mediator, I think you have to interview them and you have to see really who you feel comfortable with, who's doing the eye contact, who you feel that you can ask questions to, because that's going to be the key. And I'll give you an example. Right, when I went through my own divorce, right, we each had our own attorneys, but I had suggested that maybe we work with a mediator too, right? And at first, it didn't go over so well, but then agreed. And then I said, because I knew that my former husband gets very busy, so I said, let's just have standing appointments every Tuesday. And he didn't want to go to an office, so we did it at a restaurant,
Right.
right? And we had standing reservations. But the point is, this mediator opened our meeting by saying, okay, let's sit here and agree on the one thing that we, 100% you could both agree on. And I was like, well, that's going to be interesting because I can't think of anything we agree on. And she's like, you love those kids more than anything and you want them to be okay.
Yep.
And that set the tone for our mediation,
Yep.
because that really is the truth.
Right. Absolutely. And, on the other end of that, I see so many financial decisions made that are made to evenly protect the child financially, right? Or one person is required to take on the financial burden of 20 or 80% of the extracurriculars or the purchases made for the child. And then that person just isn't coming through. And then you have the other parent who has now gotten themselves on their feet and they're doing all the spending. They're not getting anything in return. They ask, should I just file something and go to court and get all this money back? And my belief is always, is the risk worth the reward? Are we talking about $2,000 or $3,000 here? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars? But do you often see on your end people creating their financial picture for the future and not sort of that not working out for them and then having to come back to you?
Many times, yes. And I think that, the advice that I give, and it's funny, because having relationships with people like you and also talking to therapists, I think the one thing we have to understand when we're going through divorce with someone is that because we're going through a divorce, they're not going to change and all of a sudden be this upstanding person, right?
You sure?
Yeah, I know. Yes, unfortunately. So I think that it's important that when you're agreeing to a settlement, that it's going to be something, right, that you think that person could potentially come through with, right? As an example, I have a client that kind of had that arrangement where, I think she took on paying a lot of the expenses and then would have to wait to get reimbursed. And that turned into months, which turned into half a year, which turned, and it was very stressful financially. And, I had made a suggestion, right? Like, because you never want to get the kids involved. But I said, turn it into something positive, right? So how about on a group text, like, oh, hey, you have, Joey on and your former husband on, and like, hey, you know what? College tuition is coming up. Really excited. Joey's going to rock it this year. He's excited about his classes. Do you mind sending it over so that I can get the payment in on time? And that worked like a charm. So you just have to, even though the settlement may not be working according to the way it should, I think there's always workarounds, right? So you just have to learn how to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And note that this is very different for those of you listening from saying, oh, you want those sneakers? Go tell your dad to buy them. But if there is a shared common goal that the child is aware of, like something big like college, I think that's a really great piece of advice. But it's again, like the misconceptions that people have when they're initially getting divorced. I think the biggest one is, what do I need right now to survive? And not thinking about anything past that. So what are some things that you urge women to consider when they're looking at like the bird's eye view of their finances?
Yeah. And I think so many times, right, I think that the pain point is so high and they just want to get out, right? So,
Yeah.
and I always say,
I made that cardinal mistake. Like I was out, I didn't ask questions. I just wanted the ink dried and move on. And there was so much I didn't plan for.
No, I agree. And I think the important thing, probably, I know you do this in your role, I do it in my role. I always prep clients and I say, you know what, it's going to feel like running a marathon, right? You're going to go into it, thinking like, oh, how am I going to do this? And you're going to catch your stride. You're going to feel really good. And then as you're getting towards the end, you're going to start thinking, I'm really thirsty. I need water. I'm hungry. I don't think I can make it. I'm cramping up, and you just want the pain to stop. But I always say, like, that's when I'm going to keep pushing you. That's when you need to take care of yourself. I don't know if it's your yoga, if it's your Pilates, if it's being in nature for a walk, being with a friend. Like, you have to get strong because that's when you don't want to cave, right? Because you've come this far. And I see it happen so many times, right? And then there's the balance too. You also don't want to hang on and make this painful situation go longer than it should either, because
Right.
emotionally that's not good.
Right.
So, what we try to do is, again, our role is to support the matrimonial family law attorneys, right? The numbers that they're coming up with, showing our clients, best case scenario, if everything works out the way they want to get it for you, this is what your lifestyle could look like. And we try to get them to understand worst case scenario or acceptable. Let's not even call it worse. And then we try to show them something in the middle, because I think what we see so many times is that people get tripped up when they're in their settlement meetings because assets are shifting or things are shifting and they can't, which none of us really can, in their minds understand. And so they just, break down the communication. I think if, our role is to really kind of empower, the clients to really understand what all the different options are and how it's going to look within their plan so that they can go into these settlements with an ability to maybe, make an agreement that is going to work out for them and feeling good about it.
Speaking of understanding, and we joked about this off camera, the need for like a financial vocabulary lesson
Mm-hmm.
when all of this is going on, because all of these terms are going to be thrown at you and you're not going to know what to do with them. And when the heat is on, you may just acquiesce because you don't know what anything means, right? Or how these certain topics should be approached. So I want to maybe like break down some of the more common financial terms your lawyer is going to bring to you initially, what they mean and how they need to be addressed. Okay. First and foremost, I think this is the scariest piece for any woman, is the financial affidavit. Why is this important?
Well, I think that, we get worried that, we're going to be held to exactly what's on there, right? And I think also, too, I think what's tricky about it is, do you fill it out in terms of what your life looks like today or what you envision your life to look like, right? So I think that those are tricky. And I think that the other fear is, how is my spouse filling it out, right? How is this going to look? Am I going to be questioned on how I did it?
Yeah.
And I find that seeing the way a woman fills out affidavit, much more honest, and the other side may not always be the same. So it's very interesting. I think we as women are very straightforward. I think the spouses sometimes could be a little creative.
Actually, I didn't understand the importance of the affidavit. I really I was just in such fear that it felt like a pop quiz to try and like put me in the corner and say, you spend too much money. That's bad. So
Right.
I like rounded down. I watered it down a lot. And my lawyer had said to me at the time, like, what do you mean you only spend this much at Target every month? Like, you get your period, put 2 boxes of tampons, like round up. And I'm like,
Right.
but I don't want to. And they're like, this is not to judge you. We need an accurate financial picture just so, like on the Children's Bill of Rights, you can maintain a certain lifestyle. It's not about being judged because you get Botox. It's just an understanding. And so I think because it's called a financial affidavit and it sounds very serious and outside of your realm of understanding, doesn't mean you have to pretend to be someone you're not.
That's right. But, again, you also don't want to it is a very fine line, right?
Right. You don't want to ask for $100,000 a month in like spray tanning costs.
That's right.
But
right.
But if you get a spray tan once in a while, don't hide it either.
Don't hide it. Throw it in there. No, I agree. No, I had a client call last week and, she was really upset. She's like, my attorney said I had to put down $250 for groceries. She's like, we spend like a lot more than that. And I'm like, it's okay. Calm down. Like, we could just make it up somewhere else.
Yeah.
She just knows the judge and she's trying to get you to kind of buffer to what the judge is comfortable with. So
Right.
we add a little bit more to entertainment. We add a little bit more to activities.
I love that you're helping people with that, because doing that by myself was probably the hardest part for me. I'm like looking through old receipts and like my bank statements. How much did I actually spend on my hair? And it was very, very challenging for me. So again, guys, the benefit of working with somebody like Sylvia is that hand-holding through the stuff that really makes us nauseous. Okay, so I have to laugh. I got a question the other day from a client who is in her process, and she said, I need help with the financial stuff, and I have a question that my lawyer is asking me for help on or something about the QDRO. I'm like, what is a quadro? I'm thinking. I'm like, oh, do you mean the quadro? Right? And it's QDRO, right? Or
Right.
QR, right. What is that and why is that important?
Yeah, that's a qualified domestic, order. And it separates retirement accounts. So it's complicated. So there's
What does it stand for?
qualified domestic retirement order, right?
Okay.
Quadro.
Quadro, whatever, potato, potato.
But, it's really important, right? And it's complicated because those, especially if somebody works for a big company, because they have to be separated and all the fiduciary things have to, be done just exactly properly. And they're expensive to do, right? So I think that, on average, they cost, 1,600, 1,800, right? Per
Mm-hmm.
that you have done. So a lot of times, the couples split it. And the other thing is that they take a long time to do, right? So you're not going to get those assets right away. You're going to get those assets sometimes 6 to 9 months after
Are they
divorce.
necessary in every divorce or can you choose if you want to have one?
Depending on the assets, that's a great question, right? So a lot of times if there's equal assets in a regular IRA as there is to a 401k, which is, where you would do a quadro, then it's easier to say, well, why don't we just take the IRA assets, let them keep the 401k because, we can do dollar for dollar matches. Like what you don't want to do is say, oh, okay, well, I'll take, more of the retirement accounts and you take more of the other accounts. Because again, the retirement accounts, we always have to remember, are going to be taxed more than an individual account, right?
Right.
Because they're, they have not been taxed, unless it's a Roth 401k.
And speaking of Roth, I remember when I was getting separated, my attorney asked, are there any Roth accounts? And I was like, who? I had no idea. What is a Roth account? Because a lot of people who are not earning the money and the other spouse may not know that exists or what it even is.
Yeah. And
this is financial knowledge for dummies, everyone.
No, it's not for dummies. I mean, we do this every day, right? But, if you're not doing it every day, it's hard to understand the language. But, the reality is, right? So an IRA, think about it as, money that hasn't been taxed, right? So if you're, let's say you're in a 30% tax bracket, for every dollar you put in the IRA, right, it only really feels like you're paying 70 cents because they didn't take the tax out.
Mm-hmm.
The Roth, they take the taxes out. So it's after tax dollars. So if you can have the Roth retirement or the IRA, you ideally would want the Roth, right? Because when you're pulling out the money, if there's $1 in there, I get $1. If I took the traditional, right, 401k, then I'm only going to get, I'm going to have to pay taxes. So I'll really only get 70 cents on that money. So, we had a client a couple of months ago that was working on it and he was really insisting. And it's, she was like, I don't understand why he's being more generous. He's saying he'll give me a little bit more of the IRA. He really wants to keep the Roth. And I'm like, oh, no.
That's an indication that we're hiding something.
Right.
Red flag.
And we explained to her that, that's why. And we decided that, well, why don't we split the Roth down the middle and then we'll split the 401k and the IRAs down the middle.
I can't even tell you how many times clients will come to me and they're like, but he wants to do everything amicably. I'm not worried at all. He said he'll split everything down the middle. I'm like, something's up. Something seems not right about this because there has never been a time in the history of ever where we get to the actual mediation or legal process where now somebody's trying to not be as fair financially. And I often find that the people who say that are the ones who don't want the partner to hire an attorney because they don't want things found out and they want to continue to financially control the landscape here and hide whatever they think they're hiding and pull one over on you. So if anyone ever tells you, don't get a lawyer, I'll be fair, don't listen to it. Okay. biggest question I think we need to define for people is, what is a certified divorce financial analyst and all the things that they do?
Yeah, so we're trained, right, into kind of understanding what the laws are, where the bumpers are, and we're trained to kind of figure out how to really separate the assets and avoid some of the pitfalls. So, for instance, how often does the wife want to keep the house, right? And we're going to talk about that separately because I have an opinion on that.
I have so many opinions and questions.
We'll have fun on that one. But, so think about it. If you're keeping the house and you're going to keep the house for 2 to 3 years, what we're not thinking about, right, is that when you do sell it, there's realtor expenses to sell it. If you held it long enough, there's capital gains, right? So if it appreciated more than $250,000, which we can each pass through, you're going to get hit with taxes.
Mhm.
So while it may seem like a great deal, like, again, you have to think of all these things, think it through. So they're not always as crystal clear as they look. And just like we talked about a few minutes ago, if there's some Roth money and there's some regular retirement money, how do you really want to split those? So we're really kind of taught to go in and look at things. We're taught to go in and look at cash flows, right? And everything starts, believe it or not, with the budget, right? Understanding the person's
Yeah.
lifestyle, right? And then kind of backing into the investments and how do we kind of maintain that lifestyle as much as we can today, because lifestyles are going to change,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And then how do we make them last into retirement? Because, one of the biggest things we hear, right, is, they were thought they were going to be married for the rest of their lives, and they thought they were going to be, everything was going to be cared for. And the last thing that women want to do is to be a burden on their children in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love the way you broke this down, because when I recommend to people, you should speak to a financial analyst, or do you know a CDFA in your area? They're like, for what? There's nothing to analyze. We've got no money. We've just got the house and we've just got what we've got. And I'm like, that's the other thing. The whole term financial analyst I think people automatically assume this is just for very wealthy people. It can't help me. But think of it as your divorce financial coach, I guess, for lack of a better term, right? Because
Right.
it's the knowledge on the other side of the emotional that you really, really need.
Yeah, and again, it's showing the different spreadsheets, showing the numbers, showing how to separate the assets, showing does it make more sense to take the alimony. Traditionally alimony was great to take. It still is okay, but if it's modifiable in the future, that's not a guaranteed income. And I have actually a really good example. So
Love to hear it.
I brought into this mediation, and the mediator was like, I just really need you. Like, she doesn't understand any of the finances, and she's stuck, and she's insisting she doesn't want the alimony. And she's like, he's going to be paying her like 180 something thousand in alimony for the next 10 years. And it should work well for her. And I don't get it. And he was kind of hesitant too. Like, so, this was high earners. Most of their assets were in real estate. And so when I really took her aside and we had a really deep conversation, it was so touching. And I was able to work through it. And what we found out was the reason she didn't want to take any of the alimony was that she said she never felt loved in that marriage.
Oh,
I wanted to cry. It was like so beautiful. She's like, I just honestly never felt loved. I want to fall in love. I want to be in love. And she's like, and I don't want, if I meet somebody and we decide to get married or we decide to cohabitate, I'll lose my alimony. So I said, okay, let's figure out how to then do an upfront calculation of what, right, that alimony, right, would look like in today in present dollars,
mhm,
and how we figure out how to create some assets for you to take that so that you're done.
mhm.
And then, ironically enough, the former husband, who was a doctor, ended up pulling me over and saying, you really saved, I think, our family, because I didn't want to have to pay for the 10 years. I think it was going to make me resentful. I think I could be in holidays now together. And then shortly thereafter, he called and sent over one of his friends that was getting divorced because he was so happy with what I
Wow,
did.
that's a beautiful story. So if you take a lump sum
Mhm.
up front and then 2 years from now you get married, it's still your money.
It's still yours. Now it's going to be a little bit discounted, right? Because
Right.
taking it up front, you'll get
Right, right,
but
right.
it's worth it, right? Because things change.
Right. I mean, because I don't know a single person who, if it's their first divorce, is not at least hoping they're going to get married again one day. So that's really helpful information, which leads me to, I wanted to touch on how to prepare a woman, what questions to ask about the finances in her first meeting with a divorce attorney. But we got to talk about the house, because that is the question, right?
Yes.
All I want is the house. All I want is the house. And how many times they've then gotten the house and come and said, biggest mistake of my life. Like I was telling you off camera, a tree fell and out of the power lines, broke my generator. The hot water's not working. I can't maintain this thing. Why did I fight for this?
I know. And I think because, again, we're moms, right? And that's our nest. And we want to keep our nest, and we want to protect our babies and keep them in the nest. But I always say to clients, in life, in anything that we go through, any transition, it's about how we decide to look at it, right? So if you look at it as, oh, we're going to keep this consistent and we want to keep this the same, I always say to clients, again, from an emotional standpoint, it might feel good, but maybe it doesn't, right? Because if you felt you weren't happy in the marriage, I can guarantee you your kids felt the stress.
Oh,
Right?
and the house is a reminder in my view, but also I think, and to honor for the woman who doesn't want to uproot their kids from the home that they're used to, um, the reminder that a home is not what makes the love, right?
Right.
A home is where memories can be attributed to, and maybe it's not the worst thing to start fresh symbolically, metaphorically, physically, so everyone can now attribute. Like my daughter, who was 2 when I separated, has no recollection, obviously, of our marital home. She remembers bits and pieces from the home I created for us thereafter, which was a shack compared to where we lived when her dad and I were married, but remembers it being the best and happiest time because we just decorated it how we wanted. Everything was pink and girl power and played Moana music throughout the house all the time. And so I'm often telling women, is it really worth the battle when it's not that physical location that creates the connection with your kids, right? Like the disruption doesn't get changed because of the divorce or the home. It's how you show up for your kids in spite of it.
I think so too, and I think it's all how we paint the story, right? So the story could be like, poor us, we're moving out of our house. There goes, or the story could be like, hey, you know what? We're going to go pick out our new place together, and you're going to get to redecorate your room, and it's going to feel really good. And and like the message that my former husband and I, gave our kids is, the only real big change for you is that you're going to be going from one loving household to 2.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to have a loving household over here and over here. Then we try to make it as easy as possible because the thing that breaks my heart is like the kids only wanted a mom and a dad. That's what they wanted, right?
Yeah.
And so I do feel that as much as we can, and when we're working with clients, we do try to create peace, right? Because ultimately the kids win. And I did a lot of studying, I have a lot of research, and it's never the divorce that hurts the kids. It's how the parents treat each other, right? And the tension that they feel or do not feel.
Right here, because I must say it 100 times a day. It is not the divorce, it's the conflict. And
Right.
money is the cause of a lot of conflict. And so the more we know up front, the better.
Yeah. And that being said, I've had some really upstanding guys. I mean, I almost want to cry. I'm like, oh, I wish I had one of those. But it'll say like, what,
so you're saying
divorced.
It's rare.
It's rare, but it happens. I mean, I've had men on the other side say, you know what? I really don't want to part with all this, but she's the mother of my children and I want her to be okay. I want my kids to be okay. And ultimately, if something happens to her, years from now, when she passes on, it's only going to go to my kids anyway.
Yeah.
And that is like a beautiful perspective. I mean, I wish there was a little bit more of that, right? I think.
Yeah. Well, look, I've always looked at it through the lens of my child. I remember when I was separating and my mom was like, you have to change your will and, your life insurance beneficiary. And I'm like, why? If that money is going to go to help my ex-spouse support our daughter, if God forbid need be, I'm not changing that. I'm not touching that,
Well, the only problem is that they remarry and there's a new family and, how that might go. So
Don't make me second guess.
No, I know. No, it's
right
okay.
now. No, I'm
We
just
can
kidding.
talk
But okay, so this is a perfect segue into the last thing I wanted to touch on. What should women be asking regarding their finances in that first meeting with a divorce attorney? If they have not yet worked with somebody like you or you specifically, what should they be asking?
I mean, I would say, are there any assets that could be hidden? Are there anything that we should be looking for? How do I find things? Right? What kind of documents should I be asking him for? The attorney's going to ask for a lot too. And I think that also, it's one of the most intimate relationships you're going to have, right? Your divorce attorney. So I think it's not being shy or embarrassed to say, I think he might have been hiding money. I think he might have been taking cash and doing this, and don't worry about maybe it's going to hurt him at the end because, again, it's could all could stay within the courtroom. It's important information to know.
Right.
I think to have all the truth and everything out on the table, that's how your attorney can really help you. It's just like you wouldn't go to a doctor and not disclose all your symptoms if something's wrong. You have to really not feel shame and just disclose everything.
I love that. And I would also add to that, can I be spending money right now as a question? Because women will all of a sudden be scared to spend because they're gearing up to leave, or the opposite. They'll just start spending a lot or taking money out of bank accounts to have a buffer. I remember my mom telling me in her when she knew she wanted a divorce, she was putting cash under the mattress for a long time, but we're in very different times now.
Right.
So is there something that a woman can be penalized for if she's trying to squirrel away some cash ahead of time?
Yeah, I think, again, I think to be as straightforward and honest as clear, you just don't ever want to have to be like in a deposition or in a situation where you're being questioned. And then it looks like your character is being compromised because then you will lose trust.
Right. Very good point. Always take the high road, friends. It's what I always tell everyone. Okay, before we close, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for giving us this, this is our first Money and Moving On episode. We really needed to start at the base level, the who's who and what's what of everything to come. I'm excited to go on this journey with you. But if there were one last tip you would share to a woman who is about to embark on a divorce journey, what would you tell her?
I think I'd circle back to our beginning. Find your truth, right? Find your truth. And if it's really what you want, don't let the shame or the embarrassment or the anything get in the way. And also, you know what? I feel that don't worry. I think so many times we worry about our kids,
Yes.
right? But the way that I finally had shifted and it really worked for me was to say, well, you know what? They saw us. We were in love at one point. We had a great relationship at one point. When it worked, it worked. And then it just, nothing, no one just did anything bad. It just kind of shifted and changed, right? But I convinced myself, which is my truth, is that I love being in love. I want my kids to have loving relationships. And I could talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but the kids mimic what they see, right? So if they see a not loving and not close relationship, it's just going to become norm. So I think be brave and, you're going to set the table for them.
Oh, I love this. Okay. I just got like the warm and fuzzies. For everyone listening, be brave and join us again on the next episode of Money and Moving On when we come back to share more tangible, practical tips for you to use on your journey with the wonderful Sylvia from Wells Fargo Advisors, a certified divorce financial analyst who is making this part of our lives feel so much easier. We'll see you next time.